"Isabella, I've spent the whole day shopping. Now I'll show you what I bought for our little girl," said Sarah, the girl's future mother-in-law. As she entered the apartment, Isabella smiled awkwardly. She had been living in the apartment with her fiancé and future relative for many months, but she still hadn't gotten used to such warmth from strangers. "Oh, Sarah, the baby isn't even born yet, and you're already spoiling him," she gently scolded the woman. "You've bought so many toys and clothes that he'll have to wear something new every day, and he won't even have time to outgrow his rompers. Children grow so fast. My grandmother used to say that they grow like mushrooms after the rain." She helped her mother-in-law take off her light, elegant gabardine and hung it on the hanger. Isabella couldn't help but marvel again at how well Sarah looked, with such a young grandmother wearing high heels and bright lipstick. She had never seen her grandchildren. "Well, that's great. At least we won't have to do laundry." "Let him wear something new," laughed the mother-in-law, showing her white teeth. "And in general, the little one deserves the best. Let him get used to a good life from the start. And please, Isabella, call me Sarah. There's no need for formality. We're practically family." She took the bags from the expensive brand stores, filled to the brim with gifts for the future grandson, and headed into the spacious living room, placing the purchases on the bright yellow sofa. From the bags, they began to take out bodysuits, t-shirts, pants, and adorable socks for the newborn's little feet. Isabella stood next to the woman, listening to her praise each item of clothing on the baby. She forced a smile and nodded like a china doll at each word of her relative. The ease with which her mother-in-law referred to the unborn baby as Artem continued to grate on the mother-to-be's ears. Isabella couldn't get used to it. Of course, the name was beautiful, but she hadn't even participated in choosing it. She had always thought that she would name her son Carlos. Both her mother-in-law and her fiancé agreed and said that this name was suitable. Isabella thought it was unfair at the very least. In general, Sarah's love for her future grandson went beyond all possible limits. She robbed her son's fiancé of all the joys of preparing for motherhood. The woman personally decorated the baby's room as soon as they found out the sex of the future child. She chose everything, from the walls painted in grey and blue with pictures of mountains to the crib with canopies and bedding. She bought toys enthusiastically like a collector and kept them in the room. Toy cars, teddy bears, and rattles were already waiting for their owner. Even a rocking horse stood proudly by the window, ready to welcome its rider. Meanwhile, Isabella was just going to the doctor, waiting for the day of delivery. When she tried to express her thoughts on the matter and hinted to her mother-in-law that she wouldn't mind going shopping and choosing at least a silicone pacifier for the baby, Sarah just waved her hand. "What do you think, Isabella? Why do you need that now? It is better for you to avoid crowded places altogether, especially those with children. If they are not in daycare during the week, they are probably sick, and you cannot afford to get sick," her mother-in-law convinced the bride-to-be. "You should relax, get more sleep while you can, walk in the park near the house, enjoy the pregnancy, and eat properly. I only want the best for you, Isabella, so that you do not have any pain or sorrow. I will take care of the discomfort. Don't you appreciate that?" After such a harangue and a disapproving and sad look from Sarah, Isabella became discouraged. She began to feel ungrateful. Her fiancé Pablo shared her mother's opinion. "You are stressing yourself out unnecessarily, Isabella. Mom wants to help us and she is right. Right now, the most important thing for you is to take care of yourself and the future baby." She smiled, hugging her girlfriend and gently caressing her rounded belly. "Then be happy," Isabella sighed, but she listened to her fiancé's words. Trying by all means to suppress unnecessary thoughts, she struggled not to feel like a bird trapped in a gilded cage. "Indeed, who am I?" the girl grumbled to herself. "I guess I have such a hard time believing my own luck, and that a streak of good luck has come into my life, that I am afraid to wake up." It was really hard to call Isabella's fate happy. It was only until she was 7 that the girl grew up and did not know sadness. She had loving parents, Dimitri and Alexandra. They lived modestly but happily. When Isabella turned 7, her parents began to argue. Mom was getting sadder and sadder. Dad could disappear for weeks at a time. The first grader did not understand what was happening. When I asked her, Mom just shook her head. "Your father doesn't have enough money," she said, pursing her beautiful lips. She wants to become a businessman. Isabella didn't know that her father had set up a business to try to provide the best for his family. However, he got involved with the wrong people, which deeply worried her mother. But that was not the turning point in her daughter's life. When the girl turned 8, she went to the village on summer vacation as usual. As her parents said, she was going to visit her grandparents to breathe fresh air instead of exhaust fumes in the city. When Isabel was little, she enjoyed these kinds of adventures. She loved to pick up stalks straight from a bush and, without worrying, get her hands dirty and put them straight into her mouth. They tasted so much better that way. She loved her grandmother's cooking and the smell of freshly baked pancakes in the morning, which she generously sprinkled with homemade jam and washed down with warm milk. She enjoyed swimming in the river, going on a boat ride with her grandfather, and picking mushrooms in the forest. She loved horses, sheep, chickens, and rabbits. This summer was no exception. Over the course of a month, Isabella turned a tan, and her light hair became even lighter in the sun. But in July, her summer fairy tale turned into a horrible reality. Her parents had disappeared. The cause was a car accident. When it happened, Isabella was enjoying another sunny day in the village. However, she had no idea that in September she would not be returning to the city. That is how she ended up living in that village called Selke. Much later, Isabella overheard a conversation between her grandparents and learned that her parents had passed away due to the problems. In that state of stress, the man took on the role of a drunk, and they drove off the road into a ditch. Dimitri died on the spot, and the doctors tried, but could not save his wife. They had to sell their parents' flat to pay off their debts. It turned out that their father had gotten into serious trouble. Of course, the only relatives who took Isabella in were her paternal grandparents. So the city girl had to drastically change her life. She left behind her life in the city, her friends and her family environment. The girl grew up and gradually became angrier with the people around her. She simply wanted to unleash her anger and pain on someone, anyone. At first, when she felt overwhelmed, she began to think angrily about the town. "The name of this town is so ugly," the girl grumbled. "I don't like it. They named it that because it was mostly lived by hunters. Snares are tools used to catch birds and small animals," her grandfather explained. He sat down on the ground, leaned his back on a pile of hay, and rolled a tobacco leaf to make a cigarette. "Now I feel like a little bird caught in your traps," the girl sighed sadly, sitting next to her grandfather and hugging his knees. The grandfather looked at her. "Yes," he nodded. "Don't worry, my little bird. Everything will fall into place when you grow up." As Isabella grew up, she began to view the village with fear, despite having spent her childhood under its roof. Her attitude toward her home was influenced by its rumors and overheard conversations that she had not been aware of before. Too many children in the village, and their parents gossiped about her grandfather, Procor. Now the rumors reached Isabella's ears. Superstitious and ignorant people began to talk about the grandfather, claiming that he could see the souls of the deceased and possessed special powers to cure any ailment. The man himself fueled the fire by throwing dry logs of gossip into the flames. For example, he forbade his wife Sophia to keep icons at home, and she never wore a cross nor attended church services. Of course, moderns would dismiss such behavior and point out that believing or not believing in God is an individual choice. They would call Procor an atheist and stop spreading rumors. However, the villagers, driven by boredom or a sincere belief in the supernatural, continued to slander. In their words, A grain of truth occasionally slipped in, but there was no magic in their actions. Only knowledge and skills passed down from his own parents. Prochor was an acted-upon healer. He had no medical degree or formal training. However, he was an expert in the art of traditional medicine. Prochor knew everything about the properties of medicinal plants, fences, and herbs, from their leaves to their roots. He could create healing infusions, herbal remedies, and herbal mixtures capable of reviving a wounded person. Many people visited Silky's village to knock on his door. He never turned away anyone in need. And this mystical image of his grandfather firmly rooted Isabella's soul. However, she loved him with all her heart. When the little girl was 11, her grandfather, Brocorn, died in a tragic accident on the river. After his death, life in the house became truly frightening. The little girl was convinced that she had seen the doors open by themselves, letting in the cold wind. At night, she heard creaking sounds, as if the noise was coming from footsteps on the first floor. Grandma, Sophia, of course, did not really believe her granddaughter's story. But who knows what might seem real to a little girl, especially after the death of her beloved grandfather. However, Isabel was sure that it was not her imagination, and the fear of the rural house remained in her soul, although she loved her grandfather with all her heart. It was the influence of prejudice that affected her childhood imagination. When Isabella turned 16, grandmother Sophia abandoned her. Someone from the neighbors called the authorities, and they took the orphan Isabella to the city, placing her in a rehabilitation center for minors. The house was empty. Did Isabella know that in the future this village she considered a trap would be her last refuge? Of course not. When she turned 18, she was officially released, no longer worrying about the fate of an orphan. Isabella did not want to return to the rural house. The girl managed to get into university with a government-funded place. She planned to become a food technology specialist. She was assigned a room in a university residence. The present and the future no longer seemed so uncertain to her. The scholarship was small, so the girl accepted a job as a waitress, typical of a young and energetic student. At first, she worked in a cafe, but then her friend Masha offered her a better position at the Dilemma nightclub. "How could I possibly work in a nightclub? It scares me," Isabel said. "Oh, you're a country girl. You've seen stupid movies. That's why you think nightclubs are just dens of vice and evil residences. This club is elite. Only rich people go there, and the tips they leave are so generous that you won't even earn them in a month working in a cafe. Who knows? Maybe you'll even find a prince in a white Mercedes there." After weighing everything and considering the pros and cons, Isabella decided to take a chance. She wasn't looking for a husband, but some extra income wouldn't hurt. So she started working on the Dilemma. Maria didn't fool her. There was a lot of money there. When Isabella finished university and hoped to trade her waitress uniform for a position in a company's staff after defending her degree, fate brought her together with Pablo. She arrived at the club with a group of friends. Isabella set the table for her, located in a far corner of the premises. It was clear, without any clue, why the men had gathered. "Happy birthday, Kirill." The unsynchronized chorus of male voices kept reaching her ears, drowning out even the music from the speakers. Glasses and goblets flew, colliding with each other and splashing their contents on the guests. While Isabella placed the snacks and drinks on a low table, she fell silent, amazed. "Wife, you see? She's in the maternity ward and he's already in a nightclub. Very interesting," she thought. The music in the club was blaring. The spotlights were shining in her eyes. Everywhere she looked, there was fun, glitter, smoke, and splashes of expensive champagne. 6 young men sat at a noisy table. Isabella kept staring at the handsome, dark-haired man. He was the quietest, but the most attractive of the group. His dark eyes looked almost black in the club lighting, and his smile was mysterious. He took off the jacket of his expensive suit and threw it over the back of the sofa, while his shirt was carelessly unbuttoned at chest level. The guest didn't drink much, nodding politely to the waitresses. Every time they came to his table with another round of drinks, he nodded and touched his gold badge with his eyes. Isabella. The girl looked up, her heart skipping a beat as the stranger smiled at her. She lowered her lashes, feeling herself blush. It was a good thing her embarrassment was hard to see in the dim light. "Would you like anything else?" the girl asked the guests, placing the last sweaty glass of undiluted whiskey on the glass surface of the table. She straightened up, holding the empty tray, then quickly smoothed back the lock of hay-white hair that had fallen near her ear. At that moment, one of the guests leaned forward, roughly grabbing the girl by the wrists. "Yes." "I want it," he said mockingly. "Your phone number, darling. Write it on the napkin." Isabella was startled, so much so that she did not immediately withdraw her hand from the clutches of this insolent guest. She blushed again, this time indignantly. "Sorry, that's not on the menu," the girl replied, frowning. Over the past year of working at this new place, Isabel had seen plenty of drunken fights, attempts at advances, but she still wasn't used to such behavior. Her gaze swept around, looking for support, but no one bothered with a waitress. However, that guy stood up and found himself right behind the girl. "Okay, enough with the flirting and making them hard," he said, grabbing a lock of her hair and twirling it around his finger. She shook her head, turning away. "Sorry, you've come to the wrong place," he replied. The girl wanted to get away from the overly cheerful company, but the guest obviously didn't want to take no for an answer. He gently leaned forward again, grabbed Isabella's hand, and pulled her towards him forcefully. The girl didn't expect such a reaction, only a gasp, and tried to regain her balance by shaking the tray. But the force of attraction and her guests proved to be stronger. They both fell onto the sofa, with Isabella landing right on the knees of one of the guests. The person on whose knees the waitress fell turned out to be the silent brunette herself. Laughter erupted around her. "Are you okay?" she asked. She realized she was still sitting in the embrace of a stranger, her skirt immodestly hiked up from her fall, her face deeply flushed. She pulled her skirt back down and stood up. The man didn't hold her back. "Your friends," the girl began angrily. "They're idiots who got drunk and couldn't resist the charm of a girl like you," the man continued, smiling charmingly. "I apologize in advance on their behalf. Is there any way I can make it up to you?" She tilted her head, causing strands of hair to fall over her forehead. Despite Isabella's attempts to maintain her composure, his open gaze and smile broke through her defenses. Isabella waved her hand dismissively. "It's okay," she replied, hastily picking up the fallen tray and getting back to work. The diners at the distant table no longer caused her any trouble. The young man even apologized to her, and she found a generous bill as a tip in the invoice folder. Isabella thought that would be the end of her story. However, she saw the mysterious dark-haired man again a week later. Only this time, he came alone and approached her. He introduced himself as Pablo and confessed that he couldn't get Isabella out of his head since that night. He had waited for her until dawn at the end of his shift. The young couple went out for a walk through the streets of the city, which were just beginning to wake up. The road was covered in the pre-dawn fog. Pablo threw his bag over his companion's shoulders. It turned out that he owned a large chain of clothing stores for men and women, and his mother owned beauty salons. "I've been in business all my life," Pablo shared with the girl. "I remember that he was always selling something, even at school: stickers, posters, collectible tokens. Later, I pursued a business career and held various positions, from sales consultant to manager and retail sales director." Isabella listened eagerly to his life story. She loved Pablo, his looks, his charm, and his desire for better things. They began dating. Pablo courted Isabella like a true prince, and their relationship progressed rapidly. making Isabella's head spin at times as if she were sitting in the cabin of a roller coaster. "I want to introduce you to my mother," Pablo said as soon as Isabella received her diploma. "With my mother?" The girl blinked in surprise. "But we've only been dating for a month." Pablo often mentioned his mother in conversations. They lived in a mansion in the countryside that Isabella had never been to. "So what?" The man shrugged. "I feel like I love you, Isabella, and I'm already 30 years old. I'm serious about my feelings and intentions. If you don't feel the same way, I understand." "No, you're wrong. I'm sorry, of course I am, but it's a serious step." Smiling, Pablo kissed her forehead. "So it's decided. You'll meet my mother next Saturday. Don't worry, Isabella. She'll like you." Sarah turned out to be very young and well-coiffed. At first glance, she couldn't be more than 40 years old, but Isabella understood that the owner of beauty salons could successfully defy age with the help of aesthetic medicine. For example, Sarah genuinely appreciated Isabella as a potential daughter-in-law. The woman welcomed her warmly, showing genuine interest in the orphan's fate. "Pablo, she told me that you have no family left," Sarah asked while serving tea to her guest. "Unfortunately, my grandmother. She was the last one, but she's gone too." "Poor thing, why don't you come here to live with us?" the woman offered. "It will be more fun together. You'll keep me company, because Pablo is always on the road. We live together in this huge house, and there's so much space." The offer surprised Isabella, however. When Pablo supported his mother's idea, she couldn't resist, especially since renting a house was expensive, and she had no plans to return to the village. After 2 months of living together, Isabella discovered that she was pregnant. She didn't understand how it had happened, considering that they had just started spending the night together. Pablo had brought her birth control pills, promising her that they were effective. However, they didn't protect Isabella from the 2 lines on her test. Trembling like a poplar leaf, she went to see Pablo with the news. "That's great news, Isabella," the man exclaimed. "But I was taking the pills, I swear," protested Isabella, who had not yet planned to become a mother. "Well, it seems that God wanted to give us a child, which even the pills couldn't prevent." She laughed. "It's because I love you madly, you know." Her mother received the news of the future grandchild with even greater enthusiasm. She began to protect and care for Isabella, making sure that she received the best medical care in the best clinics in the city. Meanwhile, Pablo wasted no time and proposed to her, giving her a beautiful ring and a bouquet of red roses. The truth faced the fact. "We won't touch on the wedding for now," the future husband told her. "Let's have the baby first, and then we'll have a big celebration. The doctors say you're in poor health. I don't want you to get nervous about the preparations." Isabella had never heard anyone complain about their health, but she didn't argue. Everything that was happening was too unusual for her, so she began to play along, living under the same roof as her fiancé and her mother-in-law. Autumn turned to winter, and then came spring. She barely had time to blink before she was already 9 months pregnant. Within 2 weeks, she had to go to the hospital to await the arrival of the baby. When her mother-in-law returned from the store, Isabella, apologetic, returned to the bedroom. She had been feeling ill the night before and had slept badly. Now she felt shattered. The girl lay down on the bed, deep in a daytime nap. When she opened her eyes, the sky was gloomy and rain was imminent. Isabella yawned and felt her headache finally subside. She threw off her blanket and went into the bathroom. The girl refreshed herself and decided to go down to the kitchen to eat. "I wonder if Sarah is home. I should have invited her to eat with me. It's more fun to eat together." With these thoughts, Isabella made her way to the room occupied by Sarah. She raised her hand to knock on the closed door when she heard a woman's high-pitched laughter. It was so different from Sarah's usual soft, melodic laughter that Isabella was startled. The girl stood still with her hand raised, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. That momentary pause allowed her to hear her mother-in-law's next words. "Come here. I'll tell you all the details, and you'll burst out laughing." The mother-in-law shared details with someone over the phone. "But only in a month. Just when that idiot leaves us, I will already have the baby in my arms. And you will become the godmother of the little one." Isabella was speechless. She tried to understand what she had just heard, lowering her hand. The girl pressed herself against the door, anxiously listening to Sarah's words. "Don't talk nonsense," the woman said arrogantly. "Of course everything will be perfectly fine. This girl doesn't have any relatives. She will give us a child, and Pablo and I will give her money. It's that simple." There was a pause. Apparently, the interlocutor asked if Sarah was jealous of Isabella. "No, she's not jealous." "So what?" "I know what I'm worth," the woman answered confidently. "Besides, the relationship with Pablo has been fading lately. You won't believe it, but the appearance of this Isabella rekindled the spark. You know, some couples practice open relationships to avoid divorce. That's what my husband and I have become, closer. I'm older than Pablo and I perfectly understand that he needs a little excitement. Now he turns to me with such hungry eyes when he knows that on the other side of the wall is the girl pregnant with his child." Isabella's heart was pounding in her chest and blood was pouring down her face. Tears of rage, pain, and suffering were pouring from her eyes. She felt nauseous and had to put her hand to her mouth. However, Isabella continued to cling to every word, as if poison was dripping from Sarah's mouth. "No, we couldn't do FIF. The embryos didn't implant. The doctors said it was my problem. Pablo wanted to have his own child, so that was the best option. It's a miracle that Isabella came into our lives. He picked her up at the disco, where someone told him she was an orphan." Sarah said casually, as if she were discussing the details of a profitable grocery store purchase. "You know, I've never seen anyone more naive than Isabella. It's clear that she left the village from the beginning, but the village is still in her, so it's not going to be a problem to scare her, to make her give up the child in favor of the biological father." Isabella felt the darkness cloud her vision, and her head suddenly feel heavy. For a brief moment she lost consciousness, but those moments were enough to give herself away. Isabella slumped against the door of the room that was pretending to be her mother-in-law's. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Sarah's cheerful monologue stop abruptly. Silence filled the room, and Isabella held her breath, a drop of sweat forming on her temple. "I'll call you back," Sarah said curtly into the phone. Overcome with terror, Isabella ran away from the door. Driven by the fear of being discovered, she made her way into her room, unhindered by her large belly. Adrenaline was coursing through her veins. She heard the door open and close behind her. Sarah didn't hurry, as if she was listening to the sounds of the house. Isabella, praying for everything to pass, went back into the bedroom. Shakily, she closed the door quietly, trying to calm her labored breathing and racing heartbeat as she listened to the sounds on the other side of the door. Sarah didn't make her wait. Isabella heard her creeping into the room and pause behind the door for long moments. Finally mustering her courage, Isabella knocked lightly on the door, but before she received a reply, she cautiously opened the bedroom door. "Isabella," the woman murmured softly, watching the sleeping woman. "Go away," she sighed silently to her. "Please go away," she said. Unfortunately, Sarah stepped into the room, heading for the bed. "Isabella, honey, it's late. Your head will hurt." She touched the girl's hair, and Isabella could barely contain a shiver. The girl opened her eyes slightly and rubbed them with her fist. "What time is it?" she asked. "Oh, I still feel bad." Sarah looked at the girl with half-closed eyes, but her distrust gradually disappeared. Her shoulders relaxed and her face softened. It was as if she had put on a mask. "Honey, you're burning up," she exclaimed, running a cold hand across Isabella's forehead. "Maybe we should call a doctor." Isabella shook her head. "I just want to get some rest," she confessed, then smiled at the woman. "Oh, if only I could make that delicious yellow buckthorn tea." "Zara, I'm sure that would make me feel better." At such a request, Zara relaxed completely. She nodded, promising to make the tea and leave it in the kitchen. As soon as the woman left, Isabella hurried to gather her things. She realized that she couldn't stay in that house for a second longer. "They're sick," the girl thought, her stomach clenching with anxiety. "Who knows what they'll do? Not my son. I won't give him to that crazy woman. I'll never give him up." Isabella touched her belly with her hands, caressing it, calming the baby inside her. "I'll call you Carlos," she murmured through her teeth. When Sara left for her appointment, it was already dark. Isabella had no more than 2 hours until the father of her child returned. The girl did not hesitate for a second and took a large sum of money without a guilty conscience. She put it in the inside pocket of her backpack. After all, Pablo. "You always said that I shouldn't deny myself anything," she said out loud. Her teeth chattered nervously as she checked to see if she had forgotten anything else. Her eyes fell on a bottle of medicine. She wondered what was inside. Of course, they weren't contraceptives. Isabella remembered how affectionate Pablo was, how he kept reminding her to take her pills. She thought he didn't want to have children, but in reality, he was preparing her like a breeding animal. Isabella began to involuntarily remember all the strange moments that accompanied her new life. For example, how there were no family photo albums in the house, or pictures of the son and the mother. Or how Pablo, making a mistake, called Sara Mom and justified it by saying that she was worried about her age and asked to be called by her name in public. Or how he never introduced her to his friends and colleagues. It was all a lie. How stupid and naive I was. The girl was surprised, wiping away her tears with her sleeve that clouded her vision. Isabella's emotions were tangled like a nautical knot. She took several deep breaths to regain control. She put the pills in her bag and zipped it up. When the taxi arrived, Isabella's head was spinning with tension. She knew she only had one way, the village. Luckily, Pablo didn't know she still had a house there. She was lucky, so to speak. She got a ticket for the last bus that would take her to the outskirts of the city. From there, it wasn't far to the village. However, in her current situation, and at night no less, Isabella was afraid to go beyond that road. However, next to the local shop was an old green car. A few minutes later, a middle-aged man dressed in work clothes came out of the shop, hastily stuffing a bottle and sausages into a bag. "Excuse me. You can take me. You're going to Silka, right?" The girl approached the stranger. The man smiled warmly at Isabella, paying special attention to her belly. "Of course. There's nowhere else to go from here." He nodded, and then pointed towards the carriage. "Hop on. I'll take you, darling. Who are you taking?" "I'm going home. To the street, the Esnaya." "The Naya. That's very close to our house." The man was delighted and smiled as if he had met a distant relative and not a stranger. "I live near the forest." "And who do you live with?" "I've never seen you before." "I would have noticed such a beauty. We need brides here." The man burst into a lively laugh, and Isabella couldn't help but smile at such a compliment. Her soul was warmed by the kind old man who seemed to fill her with optimism. Unfortunately, there is no one waiting for her to go home. Only empty rooms, the girl sighed, looking out the window at the houses passing by. Many still had the lights on while others were already asleep in the village. Many went to bed early to wake up at dawn. Isabella looked out at the dark streets but did not recognize her. She had the feeling of having entered another world, or perhaps the night was distorting space, playing with her memories. "My name is Seymour," the man introduced himself. "I am Isabella, the granddaughter of Procor and Sophia." Isabella decided to share it with her traveling companion. The man reacted unexpectedly, jumping in his seat and hitting the steering wheel with the palm of his hand. "Exactly," the man exclaimed. "I've been thinking, your face looks familiar." You look like Procor, Isabella. You don't remember me anymore. We used to go back and forth with your grandfather in silence, for mushrooms and all kinds of animals. Oh, those were glorious times. Isabella looked at the driver with interest. She remembered that people used to talk about her grandfather with respect and superstitious fear, but they rarely remembered him with such warmth. They were friends. Isabella smiled. Yes, we were even very good friends. I wanted to be like him, the old man shared with a nostalgic smile. He was older than me. He taught me a lot. I will never forget that man. And you don't remember you used to come running to us to ask for farm eggs when you raised your own chickens. You don't remember. And my son, you remember. Maybe not. He would be older than you. Isabella blushed awkwardly. She vaguely remembered something like that. The drive home turned out to be pleasant. The man was cheerful, telling her many stories about his grandfather. He drove Isabella to her house without asking any tactless questions. For example, why did a pregnant woman come to the village in the middle of the night? When the car stopped at the gate, Isabella found a bunch of keys in her pocket. The grandfather looked at her from under his already bushy eyebrows. I can help you with something, daughter, he offered sincerely. Isabella nodded confidently, as if she were not afraid of being left alone, but she had to. No, thank you. You have helped me enough, Isabella said. My old lady and I live nearby. Just go straight to the edge of the forest and then turn right, he informed Isabella. Goodbye, daughter. Come if you need anything. Your grandfather, he was a great man. That old man said goodbye to Isabella and drove off. The carriage raised dust as it drove off, and Isabella, sighing, turned to the door. She looked at the dark, gloomy house of her relatives. Now, arriving at the place where she grew up, she felt a pang of superstitious pain. It was dark outside, and the full moon shone down on the house, illuminating it like a spotlight. Calm down, Isabella, the dissatisfied girl murmured, hoping that the sound of her own voice would bring her back to sanity. You are not 5 years old anymore. I hope you know that ghosts do not exist. Inside, nothing had changed. She was greeted by the same low bookcase in the hall, which served as a bench for Isabella when she put on her boots. In the kitchen, there was a small table against the window with a dusty yellowed tablecloth. Grandma Sophia sewed lace herself. There was a Russian stove in the house where her grandmother cooked delicious soups, porridges and pies. Side by side were cast-iron pots and clay pots, at the sight of which Isabella's saliva dripped from her mouth. She remembered the taste of home-cooked food only too well. Isabella remembered how unhappy she was when her grandmother taught her how to light the stove and cook. She said that no one used stoves anymore. Grandma, what do I need it for? The little girl grumbled, dreaming of a quick escape from household chores to bathe in the river. I'll live in the city, not in the village. I'll go to college and stay there. I'll have an apartment and a microwave and a stove in it. In response, her grandmother just laughed. Don't complain, Isabella. Watch what I do and remember, you never know what life will be like, and such a skill will never be useless. If you have a roof, a stove, and firewood, you won't die of cold or hunger, my naive little bird. Now, remembering her grandmother's words, Isabella felt a pain in her heart. How right had her grandmother been? It was as if she could foresee that Isabella would end up alone under that roof. All alone. Touching the cold surface of the Russian stove with her fingertips, the girl felt a lump in her throat. Oh, Grandma. Grandpa, the girl murmured. How I miss you. You used to say that I had a naive soul, like a little bird, and you were right. The house had 3 rooms, and one of them was empty. It was always full of unnecessary clutter. The largest room belonged to the grandparents, while their granddaughter, Isabella, lived in the smallest. The girl went to her old room. The bed was neatly made. Next to the window was a small table and a chair that her grandfather had made. On the wall next to the bed hung posters of music groups, actors and singers that the girl had loved long ago, as if it were a past life. Unable to contain her overwhelming emotions, Isabella fell to the floor. Burying her face in the bed, she surrendered to the emotions surging in her chest. She sobbed uncontrollably, soaking the wool blanket with hot tears. Without realizing it, she sank into an unhealthy, restless sleep. In her dreams, someone was chasing her, relentlessly calling her name Artem and threatening to take him away. Isabella woke up in the middle of the night, feeling worse than before. She got up from the floor with a grimace due to the uncomfortable position. Her whole body ached, and she felt a persistent pain in her lower abdomen. "I hope there are at least doctors in that desert," Isabella said anxiously, rubbing her stomach. She approached the bed, and then a strange sound reached her ears. Startled, she listened slowly. When she looked at the door, the creaking sound repeated itself. The sound as if someone was opening the door made Isabella pale. She instantly remembered that 2 people had died in that house. Also, she couldn't forget what they had said about her grandfather. Isabella froze as she realized that the house was silent. Before she could exhale in relief, she heard a creaking sound. Click, clack. "My God," the girl muttered, crossing her arms. The idea of grandfather coming to visit his granddaughter seemed absurd, especially when he was alone in an empty house with the full moon shining through the window. Any dark fantasy seemed real. "You're not 10 anymore, you idiot," Isabella cursed herself. Gathering her courage, the girl slowly stood up step by step and walked to the door, opening it. She peeked carefully. A black blur passed quickly, clicking. "Ah!" Isabella exclaimed loudly, taking a step back, struggling to keep her balance. She was already prepared to imagine a devil with horns running through the house. Suddenly, her unexpected guest barked. At the familiar, ordinary sound, Isabella felt relief wash over her. "Oh, a dog! What are you doing here? I didn't lock the door." The round-bellied dog whimpered. His eyes were bright, his ears were flattened back, and his tail was nervously thrashing against his paws. The black dog's ear had just been torn off. "You're pregnant or something?" Isabella narrowed her eyes, staring into the darkness. Instead of answering, the frightened dog ran off. Isabella noticed that she was near the entrance. The dog fell, slumping forward with his belly and face on the ground. And then she stood up quickly and ran into the yard. A wave of compassion swept through Isabella for the animal. She grabbed the jacket she had left in the hallway and ran after the dog. The girl clicked her tongue invitingly, tried to whistle, and called the dog in a soft tone. Unaware that she had followed the pregnant animal, Isabella found herself at the edge of the forest. She hesitated to go any further, though she heard the animal whimpering somewhere nearby. "Hey, little one, come out! I won't hurt you," Isabella called. In response, a different beast emerged. It was an old wolf, covered in matted fur, its head bent to the ground. It carefully stepped out from behind the trees. It was then that Isabella realized how the pregnant dog had acquired its battle wounds, and that the wild beast, apparently tracking its prey, was waiting for her in the forest. Isabella stood frozen in fright, staring at the wolf. He bared his teeth, showing terrifying fangs. All thoughts fled Isabella's mind. What should she do? Stay still, run, scream, stay quiet, climb the tree. But in her condition, she couldn't climb. Isabella hadn't been able to decide what to do when the predator lunged at her. She screamed loudly, curled up desperately, and covered her stomach with her hands. And then, just as the predator's teeth were about to sink into her, she heard a thunderous gunshot. Isabella screamed again and felt hot tears streaming down her face. She was shaking as if she had a fever. "Hello, honey. Are you okay?" She heard the familiar voice. Isabella tried to open her eyes. The first thing she saw was the body of the wolf. Then, before her clouded eyes, the face of the old man appeared, the same one who had driven her in his car. What was his name? Isabella could not remember. The old man's name seemed to escape her, as did her conscience, which was about to abandon her. "Dear poor girl," the grandfather lamented as he looked at Isabella. "How you scared me. What were you doing here at night? No one walks through the forest at this time. You know how many wolves have multiplied in the village. They have become bold. They attack the cattle. We men chase them away, but that's why there are signs everywhere. Didn't you realize that you could end up in a trap or get shot? You didn't notice." Isabella sank sadly to the ground, feeling terrible. The old man's words penetrated her consciousness as if through water. Bile rose in her throat. "Thank goodness I came," the old man grumbled, tending to the lifeless corpse of the wolf. He was looking for Alaska, the dog. The fool chased the wolf away from the pack and disappeared. And here you are. As if hearing the voice of its owner from the forest, the black dog limped over. "What?" the old woman exclaimed happily. The dog wagged its tail and whined, nuzzling the man's hand. He stroked her ears and looked at Isabella again with concern. "Then, dear, you can walk. I'll take you to my old lady," the man stated firmly. Isabella was so emotionally and physically exhausted that she didn't even argue. She was worried that the pain in her stomach was getting worse, and she felt like she had no air left in her lungs. Her heart was pounding like a hammer in her chest, and her head was spinning. "I have stomach cramps," she murmured, leaning on her grandfather. After about 5 minutes, Isabella found herself in a stranger's warm home, filled with the smell of pine needles and sauerkraut. The housewife hurried to arrange Isabella on the couch, conscious of her pregnancy. "We should call someone," the woman said, looking at her husband. "Call him." The husband nodded and left the room. Isabella suffered another spasm. A dry hand gently touched her forehead, tenderly brushing her hair back. "Who is Luis?" Isabella murmured to herself, trying not to lose consciousness. "He's my son," the woman smiled. "He works as a doctor here. Don't worry, he's good. It's just that no one else wanted to stay in our remote area, and they invited him to the city. He doesn't want to leave us." The old woman introduced herself as Maria. She talked at length about her son. Isabella listened to her voice, trying not to think about the throbbing pain that washed over her in waves, making her grind her teeth when the doctor appeared. Doctor. Whether it was 5 minutes or 5 hours later, Isabella didn't know anymore. Time blurred, and then events burst into her consciousness. Isabella heard the concentrated male voice, although she didn't even know when she had managed to say her own name. "We are expecting your baby. Any minute now, Isabella. I will bring it into the world, don't worry, please. Listen to me. The ambulance is on its way, but there is no time to waste." "Have you assisted in births before?" she asked through gritted teeth. The man paused for a moment and asked, "Do they count animals?" Isabella's eyes widened as she grabbed his hand, which turned out to be warm and firm. "What? I'm not a cow!" Isabella exclaimed indignantly, momentarily forgetting the new wave of pain. She opened her eyes and looked at the doctor. He smiled widely, completely unfazed. The man was older than her, but not by much. The doctor's age did not inspire confidence in Isabella, who was in the middle of labor. "How old are you?" she asked, surprised. "I'm glad you've regained consciousness," the man laughed, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Listen to me. Everything will be fine, I promise. Besides, you don't have much of a choice here. Either me with a medical degree or Ludmila, the midwife. She still makes brides eat enchanted bread crusts at weddings to ensure they give birth to boys. But otherwise, she's a decent woman. You should run after her. You're joking." Isabella's anger caused her to switch to the formal "you" with an unfamiliar ease. "No, I just hope you'll keep talking to me." "Don't pay any attention to that idiot, darling," her mother said sternly. "In our village, God knows what's happened during Kosti's years of work, and in winter, the snow buries the roads. The ambulance will never arrive unless they make a detour, a 50-mile loop." The doctor's cheerful smile and calmness slowly spread to his patient. The man was encouraging her. He even praised her for breathing properly. "Everything is fine," he reassured her. "Just a little bit more, and you will be able to hold your baby." Indeed, Isabella gave birth quite quickly. No complications, very soon. A loud cry from the baby echoed through the house. "The child was healthy and strong," Luis proclaimed, placing the baby on his mother's chest. "How do you know?" Isabella asked, without taking her eyes off her son. She couldn't believe she was seeing him. So what? 2 hands, 2 legs, a head, strong voice, normal weight. He came out almost on his own. He should be looking forward to being with his mother. "All I had to do was hold him," the doctor said, smiling happily as he took off his medical gloves. "And you, Mom?" "I'm fine, I think." "Very well," Luis said happily. "Thank you very much," Isabella murmured. "Well, that won't get you out of it. You'll have to name the child after me or make me godfather." Isabella blinked, missing the irony in his tone, and then the doctor got a good slap on the back of the head. "Oh, Mom, stop making fun of the girl. You're either a doctor or a circus clown." "Don't pay attention to him. My son knows his job well. When Luis started working here, it was August. We had time to work in the fields, the blind man on Leno. On the first day they brought Igor in. He had a 15-day wound, centimeters on his cheek, and even small wood shavings. It was scary to look at him. Apparently, they used a circular saw there. So what do you think?" Luis scraped and treated every last bit of wood. He sewed it up and gore was as good as new. "I swear he still comes to see us and thanks us for our son," Isabella commented. Luis smiled with satisfaction and turned around. Isabella noticed that the tips of her ears had turned red, as if she were embarrassed. A smile appeared on the girl's face and a tender feeling of gratitude for that mocking doctor. But then suddenly the grandfather appeared at the door. He shifted from one foot to the other, avoiding looking at Isabella. She nodded towards the exit. "Well, the doctors have arrived to assist with the delivery." Isabella looked back at Luis. His hazel eyes narrowed slightly, reflecting her smile. Unable to contain herself, Isabella burst out laughing, thinking about the delay of the doctors. A wave of relief washed over her as she hugged her son. Calm, against her heart, young as a mother, at that moment she thought that everything would really be okay. Time flew by without realizing it. And now, 6 months, that Isabella lives in that town. She herself did not expect to make such a decision. However, after giving birth to her son, far from the city, confidence settled in her. She would cope with everything else as well. She named her son Dima, after his father Luis, with whom she had become friends since then. Sometimes she would say that the child should have been named after him. "Well, you still have the chance to be the godfather," Isabel would reply. Isabella. These people became almost like family to her. Maria and Seymour visited them constantly with Sarah, helped with the housework, gave practical advice, and simply did not let the child feel alone. Over time, Isabella fell more and more in love with country life. Yes, the toilet was outside, the neighbor's rooster began to crow at 3 in the morning, and there were no shutters to save her. However, all of that was made up for by the fresh air she breathed with her newborn, Carlos. After all, that was exactly what money couldn't buy. Here, too, there was delicious, natural, home-cooked food, and even the water from the local spring seemed sweeter than the most expensive bottled water. Isabel admired the atmosphere of friendliness and warmth that surrounded her son in the village. Many people worked hard. However, no one was in a hurry like in the metropolis. Here, The boys would have a few drinks and sing old songs, but it was better than the drunken brawls in the nightclubs between rich people, which Isabella often saw in the village. She was surrounded by pine and birch trees, not neon signs and billboards. There was less noise, fewer cars, and shorter queues. And that was exactly what Isabella wanted, even as a child. She was afraid that Pablo, the father of her child, would find her. He was rich and crazy. Sometimes Isabella would wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat and hug her son Carlos tighter. She felt like her ex-fiancé would steal her treasure at any moment. But time was passing. Pablo did not appear on the horizon, nor did his double Sara. Little by little, Isabella relaxed and began to enjoy life. With each passing day, she felt closer to Luis. He was kind, responsive, sincere, and had an unwavering sense of humor. Luis became a real support for her. They soon developed a mutual and sincere sympathy, as if their souls were kindred spirits. It turned out that he shared his love with her. They had many interests. They had similar tastes in cinema, music, books, food, and even engaged in heated debates on political topics. They could spend hours talking about something or passionately arguing about an interesting topic. One day, Luis revealed one of his secrets to Isabella. "You probably don't remember, but it was thanks to your grandfather that I decided to become a doctor," he said as they sat by the river, with little Carlos sleeping in his arms. "How so?" Isabella exclaimed in surprise. Luis plucked a blade of grass and popped it into his mouth. After chewing it, he squinted at the sun before telling his story. "When I was young, I was often made fun of. And Tartar was a very mute person, believe it or not. Your grandfather, he cured me. I don't remember exactly what he did, but now I think that old Brocco always deceived me. He made me believe that he was curing me, and then it was a placebo effect, although perhaps he really cured me. However, he impressed me so much that in my childhood I had decided that I wanted to help people, to cure them. Usually, childhood dreams are forgotten. Many wanted to be pilots or astronauts, but I never lost my passion, and I don't regret it." "I was told that my grandfather was a witch," said the girl as she looked at the silvery glow of the summer river. "There are plenty of fish there, and Luis and I even managed to catch fresh fish for dinner a couple of times. Did you think so?" The mischievous doctor gave her a sly look. Isabella blushed and lowered her eyelashes, saying, "Well, I loved my grandfather very much, but in childhood you believe anything. Besides, he used to joke and say he was a magician, and I even believed that mermaids lived in the river and that the prettiest girls rode broomsticks at night and flew to the forest. Well, if the prettiest girls were flying, you would have known." Luis winked at her, once again causing her to blush at his playful compliment. As time went by, Isabella found her gaze fixed more and more on the doctor, while Luis played with his son or read to her from his medical books. She silently examined his handsome, well-defined face, framed by his reddish hair, her gaze fixed on his straight, slightly curved nose and on his long eyelashes. Any girl would have envied him. She paused at the sharp line of his lips, feeling her heart tighten as she saw his lips curve into a smile. Sometimes Isabella wondered if she meant anything to him. After all, Luis was so kind, considerate, and caring to her. He constantly gave her and her son nice gifts. He took care of his health, and they spent a lot of time together. But when a spark of sympathy began to flicker in his heart, Isabella immediately extinguished it and drove such thoughts away. Who needed a woman like Isabella, a single mother with a child in her arms? Don't talk nonsense and don't look for something more in ordinary human kindness. He's just bored in the village. That's why he became friends with you. He mentally scolded himself. And he worries because a doctor's duty is to measure the attention to people. Besides, you already fell in love once, and it didn't end well. So that was enough. Said and done. So Isabella closed her heart, forbidding herself to feel anything more than friendship towards dear Luis. Over time, she not only learned household matters, but also began making homemade cheese, wine, and other delicacies. The locals willingly shared recipes and skills with her, and Isabel found true solace in that hobby. After all, she studied for a reason. Carlos grew up to be a joy to his mother and the other townspeople. Everyone loved that little boy. So he had many nannies, but as I have sometimes learned, even with 7 nannies, a child can end up blind. That all of Carlos's senses remain intact. But his mother had recently acquired a few grey hairs. In a few days, Carlos would be 9 months old. For such a small child, the date was certainly important. By then, winter had arrived, clear and covered the village in a thick blanket of snow. She was humming a pop song under her breath, which had nothing to do with lullabies. She had listened to it when she worked as a waitress, and now she remembered how her demanding son fell asleep much more comfortably to modern songs than to boring old lullabies. "Sweet dreams, my darling," the woman said tenderly, tucking Carlos into his new crib. The Sadovs had given him this crib. They had previously slept in a wooden crib, which had since been stored in the attic of the house. The grandfather had fixed it up, repainted it. Now the crib looked as good as the ones on display in shops, covering her sleeping son with a blanket. The young mother looked at her watch. It was only 7 in the evening, but it was already dark outside. Isabella tiptoed out of the room so as not to wake the boy. She wanted to freshen up and set the table before Luis arrived. The doctor promised to come to dinner, but he was late because one of the locals slipped on the ice and broke a leg. The guest showed up at Isabella's house half an hour later, but it wasn't Luis. "Luis, I'm in the kitchen. You're early," the girl shouted when she heard someone enter the house. "You must wait. I just put Carlos to bed, so I just started cooking. You always like to negotiate." Isabella didn't finish the sentence. She looked at the door and froze. There stood the man who often appeared in her nightmares. "Where have you hidden yourself, darling?" said Pablo, gritting his teeth with his black eyes shining. "I can barely find you." Pale, Isabella gripped the corner of the table. Her gaze involuntarily drifted to the hallway, where her son slept in one of the rooms. "Go," the girl said. "I'm leaving, Isabella. I'm leaving." "I don't need you, but I'll take my son." "No," she shouted, clenching her fists. "Think about it, how he's going to live here in this shack. I'll give him much more. So enough of the drama. You shouldn't have run away in the first place. But that's in the past. I came for my son." "The boy will be better off with his mother," she stated. "We're not married, so you're nobody to him. Besides, you and your little wife should go to a psychiatrist before having children." "Pablo, you are sick. Normal people don't act like that." "Ah, yes," the man mocked, his eyes narrowing. "I remember you didn't think I was crazy when you slept in my bed and enjoyed all the comforts I gave you." Isabella didn't respond to the comment. She simply spoke again, this time with more confidence. "Go away, Pablo. You won't stoop so low as to steal a son from his mother, will you? Would you end up in jail?" "No, dear. I have too many friends in law enforcement." "So you ran away for nothing. It could have ended better. You could be living comfortably with money in the bank." "Nothing to worry about," he said, shaking his head in disappointment and gesturing mockingly toward the hallway. "My son is there. Don't go near him. I'll take him myself." Pablo headed for the bedroom door. Angry, Isabella lunged at him. On the way, she managed to grab a kitchen utensil she used to put pots in the oven. Pablo turned around, just as the girl brandished her gun. "Look at you, crazy woman!" she screamed. Reacting quickly, the man grabbed a stick, preventing the blow from landing on her head. He pushed Isabella hard, who tried to grab onto his face, occasionally succeeding. The girl slammed her back against the table, sweeping away the dishes prepared for Luis's arrival. "Idiot! Imbecile!" Pablo shouted, wiping his face with the palm of his hand. She had traces of his ex-fiancé's nails on her. Isabella's conscience left her for a moment. But when it cleared, she saw a third participant appear on the scene, Luis. She didn't bother to find out who the culprit was. The man touched Pablo's shoulder, making him turn around, and with a precise blow to the jaw, he sent him to the floor. "Stay still," Luis barked. "If not, I'll destroy you, I swear." Then the doctor rushed to the girl. "Isabella, my dear, how are you?" Concern flickered in his usually cheerful eyes. Isabella had no time to open her mouth when Pablo, with a savage roar, lunged at Luis. A scuffle ensued, with the two men rolling around on the kitchen floor, throwing dust and debris at each other. Luis managed to pin Pablo to the ground, but Pablo grabbed the broken handle of a salad bowl and drove it hard into the face of his opponent, who was looming over him. "Isabella!" Luis cried in fright. Taking advantage of Luis's opportunity to hurt, Pablo hit him once more on the head. The next second, a man rushed to the door. Isabella didn't chase him, clutching his jacket trying to stop him. Another blow, a resounding slap with the palm of his hand, made everything ring in her ears, making her collapse on the floor. Meanwhile, Pablo grabbed the baby from the stroller. He wrapped him in a blanket and ran towards the exit. "I will destroy you, you bastard!" Isabella screamed, getting up from the floor full of fear for her son and rage towards her kidnapper. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, numbing any pain or cold. Running after Pablo in the freezing night, Isabella's feet sank into the snowdrifts as she chased after her ex-fiancé. She ran to her car, which she had parked far from her house. By the time Isabella caught up with Pablo, he had already gotten into his car, placing the sobbing baby in the back seat, and started the engine, making the car growl. Isabella threw herself onto the hood, falling on top of him and staring at Pablo through the windshield. "Don't you dare! Give me back my son!" she screamed furiously, tears streaming down her cheeks in a torrent. Pablo honked his horn. "Get out of the way, you idiot! You think I'm going to stop? I don't care about you!" "Give me my son back!" Pablo became furious. He threw open the car door, lunged at Isabella, and pulling her off the hood, threw her into the snow. "Do you think you can do anything?" he said in her face. "Wake up, Isabella. You're nothing. You have no money, no contacts, no family. You're alone, and nobody needs you. That's why we chose you. So behave yourself, accept defeat, you naive fool." Isabella trembled as if she had a fever. But from what? From horror, from fear, from cold, from malice tearing at her chest. "Then you'll have to bear another sin on your soul, Pablo," the girl said, showing her eyes. Blue eyes. "Because I will not give you my son while I am alive." Pablo wanted to say something, but then he raised his head, staring into the dark distance. His eyebrows furrowed first towards his nose, and then rose in astonishment. "What the hell?" he whispered in superstitious horror. "Isabella!" She saw the man's face suddenly sink and turn pale. Then the girl also heard something strange happening behind her. She turned around fearfully, expecting to see, for example, a pack of wolves or something even worse. But what appeared before Isabella's eyes astonished her even more. "Take your hands off our daughter," shouted the grandfather, waving a terrifying-looking pitchfork. And his son, Luis, with all the men of the village at his head, and even Alexei, who had broken his leg, continued to welcome him through the snow, staring intently at the uninvited guest. Isabella involuntarily opened her mouth in amazement. The gloomy, determined villagers looked impressive, and their weapons were even more frightening. Scythes, roasted shovels. The procession looked like a group of medieval soldiers. How are they depicted in books or in photos? No, even more than that. An angry mob armed with killer whales. It resembled witch hunters, vampires or mad scientists, hiding among themselves resurrected monsters. But it didn't matter how that image looked. Actually unleashed on Pablo, and judging by the man's bewildered appearance, he was ready to give up without a fight. "Isabella, are you okay?" Luis asked, appearing at her side. He pulled his jacket off, wrapping it around her shoulders, and lifted her off the ground, making her stand up from the wet snow. Isabella felt a wave of relief when she saw that Luis was okay, save for a dry bruise on his face. Isabella nodded in response, unable to put her feelings into words. Carlos in the car. The doctor nodded. His face was stern again. He looked at Pablo with a look that promised all the circles of hell. Okay, guys, I understand everything. Pablo raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. I'll go, okay. Take the kid. But let's not cross any boundaries, okay? Neither you nor I want to go to court. Besides, you must not have money for lawyers. No, you don't understand anything, Luis said. You had the chance to escape, but you didn't take it. And maybe we don't have enough money for a lawyer, but if there's no body, there's no lawsuit, right? Whether it was Luis's tone or his piercing gaze, it made Pablo shudder. He realized there would be no negotiations. He took a step back, intending to hide in the car. But Luis was fast. He rushed forward, slamming the door in front of Pablo. In the next second, the ground was pulled out from under his feet, sending him sprawling into a pile of snow at the edge of the road. Please, I won't be gone forever, Pablo pleaded, crawling away from the crowd. Of course, forever. People don't go back there. One of the people laughed, and the rest joined in. Don't worry, I'm just a doctor, Luis said, with a deceptively friendly smile. Maybe you'll get better if these guys tear you up, but I can't promise you anything, of course. Isabella didn't know what happened next. At that moment, she managed to get her son out of the car's lounge. Carlos was still crying, but not as loudly. It's all over, honey. It's all right. He hugged the baby tightly, wrapping him up. Luis was nearby, silent. He took off his boots and made Isabella put them on. Then he put his arms around her shoulders and led her into a house. Not his own, but his parents'. The girl didn't resist. Maria gave Isabella some chamomile tea with honey. The drink was tasty, but it didn't calm her down. She didn't let go of her son until an hour after the incident, allowing Maria to put him to bed. Now the woman was sitting in one of the bedrooms, watching the baby. Isabella, after changing into dry clothes, stayed with Luis. She carefully treated the doctor's head wound, blowing on the cut each time, which caused him to wince. This is what happens, Luis, she smiled, touching the treated wound with cotton. You are our doctor, and today it is you who needs treatment. Being a patient is not my thing, Luis grumbled discontentedly, but then he stretched his lips into a sly smile. On the other hand, here you have such a service, such nurses. It is a pity not to become a hypochondriac. Isabella giggled. She had already grown accustomed to the young man's playful banter, though her cheeks still betrayed a blush. How did you manage to gather everyone? The girl Luis asked, turning over in her mind the spectacular appearance of the rescue team. Is there some kind of alert system? A group chat that I wasn't added to in the village? Are you telling some technological marvel? Luis joked, narrowing his eyes mischievously. Actually, we use bronze bells. Like in ancient times. What, bells? Bells are an ancient signaling instrument, a mechanical board that must be struck with a hammer to alert the neighbors about a fire or an enemy attack, the doctor explained. Doctor, good-naturedly. I snapped out of it and said, let's ring the bells. The girl clicked her tongue and poked the talkative patient in the side with her finger. No, really. Stop making up stories. Tell tales. Come on, you won't let me embellish the story. Luis rolled his eyes at the ceiling. Actually, when I was going to see you, I was talking to my father on the phone. He specifically asked me to hand you the receiver when we met. But when I heard your conversation, the shouting, he didn't hang up the phone. It stayed on the floor and my father heard the conversation. She immediately realized that something was wrong. She quickly gathered the boys together. In fact, they rushed to your house, and I burst out, already coming to myself. We quickly found you, following your tracks." The girl smiled, and the old man accepted him like a true father, his heart filled with love and tenderness for the man. "What will happen to Pablo?" the woman asked, moistening a new piece of cotton with antiseptic. Luis shrugged. "They will bury him somewhere in the cemetery, and then we will bring chamomile in the summer." Isabella remained motionless, with the hand holding the cotton, not reaching her face. Luis could not contain himself and burst out laughing. "Just kidding, Isabella. His classmates will scare him. Give him a little beating and then send him home. I think they've already sent him home. They're probably celebrating somewhere. Maybe they're already drinking." "But what if he really goes to trial?" the girl mused. "Oh boy, we have the whole town as witnesses," he replied relaxedly. Isabella went back to work. She moved closer to blow on the wound. At that moment, she caught Luis's intense gaze on her. The girl involuntarily held her breath, now realizing how close she was to him. His hand jerked, pressing harder on the wound, making her wince. "Forgive me, it hurts," the frightened girl exclaimed. Luis shook his head with a smile. "No, it doesn't hurt anymore," he said mysteriously, and then, as if he was saying something, he leaned forward. "Isabella, you know, when I saw you, even my reason clouded over." He breathed out those words and stepped back for a moment, nervously ruffling his reddish hair. Then his gaze returned to Isabella's flushed face. "When I thought that that bastard would do something to you or the little one, my mind filled with noise. I've never experienced anything like that, you know?" Isabella fell silent, afraid to say a word, not wanting to interrupt Luis's speech. Always cheerful, and now serious, and at the same time perplexed. She was effortlessly revealing her feelings for Carlos. Her heart was wrenching, and when I couldn't protect you, I felt so inadequate. I woke up, and you and Carlos were gone. The door was wide open, an eerie silence in the house. I managed to imagine the worst, as I searched for you. And when I ran, do you know what I kept thinking about? That I've been trying for a long time to work up the courage to confess my feelings to you. Isabella, I like you, I really do, and I think I love you. I say in a hesitant voice, swallowing hard, smiling, uncertain with tenderness, looking at her stunned face. I understand that this isn't the right time. When you told me about your ex-fiancé, I decided not to burden you with my feelings. I will give you time to recover, but today I have clearly realized that I have to take advantage of every opportunity, or else everything can be lost in an instant. I don't want to lose you, Isabella. He finished his meaningful monologue, and silence filled the room, allowing the girl to slowly compose herself. The doctor moved closer to her face. Luis briefly glanced at her lips, which made Isabella blush. Her whole body trembled, and butterflies fluttered in her stomach. Then the front door of the house flew open. "Oh!" the tipsy grandfather exclaimed in satisfaction. "You're already asleep." Isabella and Luis separated quickly, as if surprised in the act of an unfulfilled kiss, like school children. The girl blushed, and Luis cleared his throat nervously when he appeared in the doorway, with his fur hat pulled down over his eyebrows, his nose red, either from the cold or from the drink. He looked at the boys thoughtfully. "Did I interrupt something, perhaps?" He scratched the back of his neck, sensing the atmosphere. Isabella and Luis exchanged glances and couldn't help bursting out laughing. The tension of the evening dissipated along with the laughter, bringing stomach aches and watery eyes. "No, Grandpa, you haven't bothered me." Isabella shook her head. "We weren't planning to do anything. We're just talking." "That's true," Luis snorted playfully. "Well, I hoped so," Isabella felt. "There's no need to rush. Maybe we have our whole lives ahead of us." She smiled widely at the man who had left her feelings for her. The doctor's face lit up. He touched the girl's hand, gently squeezing her slender fingers. Isabella squeezed his hand in response, realizing that she never wanted to let go of him again. Grandpa Seymour, who had gone into the kitchen, rattled pots and pans. "Looking for food," Maria muttered, squinting in the light as she approached him and gently scolded him. "You're going to wake the boy, old man." "Shut up." Isabella looked back at Luis and then at their intertwined fingers. She felt like she was home at last, because home is a place where you stay.